Welcome in, everybody, ready to dive into South Asian politics. 8 different countries, billions of people, and a region where, well, the past never seems to stay in the past.
It's a region where history and religion, they kind of clash with global power dynamics, and it creates this political landscape that is constantly shifting.
Yeah, and you can't really understand what's happening in the world today without understanding what's happening in South Asia.
It's fascinating, right? You've got nuclear-armed rivals, India and Pakistan. You've got India as a rising economic powerhouse trying to find its place globally. And then there's the after effects, the ripple effects of decades of conflict in Afghanistan.
Yeah, like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. We've got a lot of ground to cover in this deep dive. We've got historical accounts, British colonialism, all the way to current analyses of everything from ethnic conflicts to climate change.
And the question we're going to grapple with, I think, throughout our time here is what does the future hold for South Asia? Can a region with such a turbulent past overcome its divisions? Can it forge a new path?
Well, let's unpack some of that historical baggage, right? You can't understand the present without understanding the past.
Yeah,
And in South Asia, the past is always present.
right.
The British Empire's influence, especially the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan, it continues to cast this long shadow over the entire region.
The partition, I mean, that was just a cataclysmic event, led to unimaginable violence and displacement. Millions of people were killed or forced to flee their homes. And that trauma, it's still felt today.
It's a wound that never really healed, and the scar tissue keeps getting, well, irritated.
Yeah.
Ongoing conflicts, political maneuvering, it just keeps it open.
Exactly. And, the partition, it didn't just create two new nations, India and Pakistan, but it also sowed the seeds for future conflict, like the dispute over Kashmir, the rise of religious nationalism, the ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. These are all legacies of that one decision in 1947.
And it wasn't just India and Pakistan that were affected by this, right?
Yeah.
You've got the creation of Bangladesh in 1971 after a brutal war of independence. It further reshapes the political map of the region.
Yeah, and what's often overlooked is how these historical events, they continue to shape political systems and identities of the South Asian nations today. I
Right.
mean, for example, in Pakistan, the military has repeatedly intervened in politics.
Right.
They cite the need to protect the country from internal and external threats,
Right.
often invoking, the legacy of partition and the ongoing rivalry with India.
So it's almost like this cycle, right? Historical trauma and political instability that just keeps feeding on itself.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yes. But it's important to note that each country in the region has its own unique story, its own story of independence and nation formation. I mean, India, despite its vast diversity and challenges, has maintained a pretty vibrant democracy, albeit one that's facing increasing pressure in recent years.
You mentioned democracy, and it is interesting because we see this range of governance models, right,
Yeah.
across South Asia. You've got India, prides itself on being the world's largest democracy. But then you've got countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh
Yeah.
that have struggled with military coups and periods of authoritarian rule.
And even within the democracies, there are significant challenges.
Yeah.
Corruption, dynastic politics, the erosion of press freedom, all threats to the long-term health of democratic institutions.
Can you give me some specific examples of what you mean by dynastic politics? I hear that term thrown around a lot, but I don't know if I fully understand how it plays out, on the ground.
Sure. So in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, you see these really powerful families who've dominated politics for generations. They often use their wealth, their influence to control political parties, to manipulate elections, to secure key positions for family members.
It's almost like a feudal system where power is passed down through inheritance rather than through free and fair elections.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And this concentration of power within a small elite, it can really undermine democratic norms and institutions. It makes it really difficult for new leaders to emerge. It stifles the voices of ordinary citizens.
So even though South Asia has made these significant strides since independence, there are still really deep-seated challenges that threaten to just derail progress. It's like this constant tug of war between democratic aspirations and the entrenched forces of power and privilege.
And then you add in, the volatile mix of ethnic and religious conflicts, and you really get a sense of just how complex this region truly is.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, ethnic and religious tensions, they're kind of woven into the fabric of society in South Asia.
It feels like every country in the region has its own version of this struggle.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And these tensions often erupt into much larger conflicts. I mean, take Sri Lanka, for example. You had that decades-long civil war between the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minority.
Right.
Finally ended in 2009, but it left deep scars on the nation. It's a reminder of just how quickly these ethnic tensions can escalate into full-blown conflict. The consequences are just devastating.
Absolutely. And it's not just Sri Lanka. You see similar dynamics in India. Hindu-Muslim tensions have been exploited for political gain, leading to these horrible outbreaks of violence.
It seems like religion is often used as a tool to divide people in South Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians use it to mobilize their base, to demonize their opponents, and it just leads to this increased polarization and distrust.
It's true. And this climate of fear and suspicion, it makes it almost impossible to address the underlying causes of the conflict.
Right.
Poverty, inequality, political marginalization.
It's a vicious cycle. The more these tensions are exploited, the harder it becomes to build bridges and find common ground.
Absolutely. And it's not just domestic politics that are affected. These tensions spill over into regional dynamics, particularly the rivalry between India and Pakistan.
The India-Pakistan conflict, it's like a ghost that just keeps coming back to haunt the region. We talked earlier about how the partition really sowed the seeds of this rivalry, but the dispute over Kashmir, that's really kept it alive for decades.
Kashmir is often described as the world's most dangerous flashpoint, and for good reason. Both India and Pakistan, they claim the region in its entirety, and they fought 3 wars over it, and then you throw in the presence of nuclear weapons on both sides,
Right.
and it just adds to that sense of urgency.
It's a sobering thought, the potential for a conflict that could escalate into a nuclear exchange. That's a very real threat, and it highlights just how high the stakes are in South Asia.
Absolutely. And the Kashmir conflict, it has these far-reaching implications. I mean, it influences everything from regional security to economic development. It's a major obstacle to any kind of regional cooperation, which is desperately needed to address some of the shared challenges, like climate change and poverty.
You mentioned regional cooperation, and it's something that we haven't really explored in detail yet. I mean, given the historical baggage, the deep-seated rivalries, is meaningful cooperation even possible in South Asia?
It's a daunting task, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, I mean, it was created with these lofty goals, economic integration, conflict resolution, but it's been largely ineffective, mainly due to political differences.
So is SARC a lost cause?
Well,
Is there any hope for regional cooperation?
I mean, SARC might be on life support, but I think there are other signs of collaboration emerging. We're seeing more bilateral agreements, particularly in areas like trade, water resource management, disaster relief.
Can you give me some specific examples of this successful bilateral cooperation?
Sure. So India and Bangladesh, they've made some progress on sharing water from the Ganges River. It's a vital resource for both countries. They've also strengthened economic ties. Bangladesh is actually one of India's largest trading partners now.
So they're finding ways to work together on practical issues that directly benefit their people, even if they can't agree on the bigger political issues.
Exactly. And these small steps, I think they can help to build trust. Maybe, create a foundation for future cooperation down the line.
What about these larger issues, like strengthening democracy and managing diversity? Are there any regional initiatives that are focused on those challenges?
Well, there are a number of civil society organizations, think tanks working on these issues, and they work across borders. They're promoting dialogue, they're fostering people-to-people connections, they're advocating for policy reforms.
Sounds like they're trying to build a sense of shared identity and a common purpose among the people of South Asia, even if their governments can't do the same.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, it's often said that the people of South Asia, they have more in common with each other than they do with their own governments.
Right.
And these civil society initiatives, they're tapping into that shared heritage, that cultural affinity.
It's an encouraging thought that despite all these political divisions, there's a groundswell of people that are working to build a better future.
It definitely gives me hope. And it reminds us that change often starts from the bottom up, not the top down.
We've been talking about a lot,
Mm.
legacies of colonialism, the struggle for democracy, but there's another layer here I think we got to look at. The global forces shaping this region's future.
Yeah, it's like everyone wants a piece of the pie, right? You've got these superpowers, the US, China, Russia, all vying for influence. It's strategically crucial, and you can't really understand South Asia's trajectory without looking at what these players want.
So let's start with the U.S. What's their objective in South Asia? Is it all about counterterrorism, or is there something bigger at play here?
Well, I mean, Afghanistan, that was definitely a huge focus for the U.S. after 9/11, but lately I think we've seen a shift, a bigger emphasis on containing China's rise, you know. And in that sense, India's become a key partner,
Hmm.
a burgeoning economy, military capabilities, all that.
But India's historically been wary of alliances,
Hmm.
right? They've always kind of preferred to play all sides, stay non-aligned.
True, but China's getting more assertive, and that's changing India's calculations. Plus, you've got those border disputes in the Himalayas just adding fuel to the fire.
So China's pushing India closer to the U.S., maybe unintentionally. But what's China's long game here? I know we've talked about their Belt and Road Initiative, but is there a bigger vision?
It's multifaceted. China's pouring money into infrastructure projects across South Asia. They're increasing their naval presence, and they're forming strategic partnerships with Pakistan, Sri Lanka, others. Some analysts, they see this as China trying to create a new order, with themselves at the center, of course.
So it's not just economics, it's about reshaping the whole geopolitical landscape, even if that hurts India's ambitions. Sounds like a recipe for tension.
The potential for conflict is definitely there. The
Yeah.
India-China rivalry, I mean, that's one of the biggest geopolitical stories of the 21st century, and South Asia is, well, it's a key battleground.
And what about Russia? Where do they fit in? They've always been pretty tight with India, haven't they?
Yeah, they're a major arms supplier to India, and they've got that shared interest in, keeping China's power in check. But Russia's gotten closer to China in recent years too, so it's this weird triangle situation now.
So it's this geopolitical dance, right?
Yeah.
Constantly shifting partners. Makes your head spin. But how does all this impact the average person in South Asia? I mean, that's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We talk about strategies and power plays, but ultimately it's about people's lives.
Right, exactly. How does the U.S.-China rivalry affect, a farmer in Bangladesh dealing with climate change or a young person in Nepal trying to start a business?
The impact, it's often indirect, but it's real. Economic policies, trade agreements, military alliances, even cultural trends. It all filters down. It influences everything from jobs to political freedom.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Colonialism, the struggle for democracy, geopolitics. What's the future for South Asia?
Yeah. The future's never set in stone. I
Yeah.
think that's the one thing we know for sure. South Asia has incredible potential, but some really serious challenges.
After all of this, what do you think is the single most important thing that will determine how the region develops?
It's all about cooperation, in my opinion. Can these nations overcome the past and work together?
A question that, well, it'll define their future, I think. Can they harness their potential to build a more prosperous, peaceful region? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into South Asian politics, folks.